That was a video I found basically in Syria. They were celebrating Ashura because it's a Muslim holiday in Damascus. The point is that it's secure enough to be able to hold a holiday like that. Um, as far as that news goes, and something I didn't know, I guess it's a day of mourning, a mourning celebration, and the Sunnis, that's for Shiites, and the Sunnis, they celebrate it a different way, which is they celebrate the Israelites being freed from Egypt. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So Nasrallah of Hezbollah in Lebanon says we won't bargain existence of Syria for some ministry post. So he basically appeared for the second time, I guess, in the last year among crowds mourning Imam Hussein for the second day secession in southern Beirut, confronting every threat posed by enemies, whether Zionist enemy or the Takfiri militants. One of the things was adherence to resistance. He said, however, the resistance in Lebanon liberated the land, but the enemy still exists and is still threatening, spying, and preparing for wars. So he asked if Lebanese are required to empty the battlefield for this enemy. Some other things was that Palestine is still the central cause, and also not to be divided. As far as Syria, he says no bargain on our presence in Syria. As long as the reasons are present, we will stay there. The problem in Lebanon is that they always turn the actual problem into a reason, and anyone who puts Hezbollah's withdrawal from Syria as a precondition for forming a government is putting a hopeless condition, and he says they won't bargain on our presence in Lebanon and Syria. The axis of resistance. Now, this is from yesterday. Lebanon threatens retaliation after rocket fire from Syria. There was multiple spillover incidences from the Syrian war. The Lebanese president warned his nation is ready to reply to the sources of fire after multiple cross-border incidences from neighboring Syria targeting both Sunni and Shiite towns along the border. It started in early morning with a series of rocket strikes against Shiite towns. And finishing up on Lebanon here, it says a Syrian helicopter gunship also crossed the border into Lebanon for some attacks on nearby Sunni towns, which have been claimed to be staging areas for the rebel factions. This was after this rocket strike in these Shiite towns, and it says here that they have a strong Hezbollah presence, making them a target for Syrian rebels. Then Saudi Arabia funds this Takfiri distorted Islam in Syria. It says Saudi Arabia is fraudulent in terms of its using its money to pervert justice, to pervert Islam, to pervert social change, said Randy Short in a Friday interview. It's been sending its money to sponsor the Takfiri militants' deviant interpretation of Islam in Syria. It says it seems like they should use that money for the poor people in Saudi Arabia versus destroying Syria. And I think they already were, but he says it just shows that the Saudi ruling monarchy has made itself a criminal regime. So the kingdom has reportedly earmarked about $300 million US dollars, to the so-called transitional government in Syria, which is planned to be set up by the foreign-sponsored opposition. The monthly budget is estimated to be $50 million. Then you have this crazy story. Al-Qaeda, these are what they are, these Takfiri militants, among other forces, they're called Al-Qaeda. Linked rebels apologize for cutting off the head of the wrong person. Islamic State of Iraq and al-Shaman militants say they're sorry for decapitating a fellow extremist rather than an enemy. There's basically another Sunni Islamist, but it says here that they do not share the same Al-Qaeda ideology. These same people are going back to Europe. They're from Europe and they're going back there, but most of them are not Syrian. That's the thing about it. They'll call that a civil war. 4 men aged between 22 and 35 have been arrested in Paris for allegedly belonging to a militant network sending fighters to Syria. It says about 440 people from France were either currently fighting in Syria's war or planning to go and fight, or had recently returned. And whatever this is, I'll get to it, about the chemical weapons, adopts a new Syrian chemical weapons plan after Albania refuses to host stockpile dismantling. We were covering that about how Albania, they were trying to dump it off on Lebanon, these nuclear waste from Syria, dismantling their sites, give it to Lebanon or Albania, and they both said no. Or actually, Norway, and now they're just trying to push it on Albania. They held protests recently too. But the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, I think they just got a Peace Prize or something, adopted a new plan Friday night for the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons arsenal after Albania refused to host a dismantling of the stockpile. So they're trying to force it on them, ooh, you got the protection of NATO, It was made by the U.S., its NATO ally, the request. So they say it struck a blow to the U.S.-Russian deal to eliminate Assad's chemical arsenal, and the deadline was on Friday. 1,300 tons of Syria's sarin, mustard gas, and other agents. They say they want them destroyed by June 30th, 2014. Then John Kerry on Israel, he says that the U.S. is 100% with Israel. Well, at the same time, you have the White House saying that they're not for increasing sanctions on Iran. Like I said, it's for their own the Western Zionist financial interest. But some people in Israel might be freaking out because they're feeling isolated or left out. What's important here is that we stand with Israel firmly 100%, says Kerry. There's no distance between us and the dangers of Iran's nuclear program. The end game for us is exactly the same. Then to Israel again. Israel to return harvested organs of dead Palestinians. So the head of the Zionist entity's Forensic Institute admitted harvesting organs from martyred Palestinian bodies without the permission of their families occurred. We started to harvest corneas. Whatever was done was highly informal. No permission was asked from the family. This was, he said in an interview back in 2000. They harvested bones, corneas, heart valves, and skin from Palestinians and even foreign workers. He described how doctors would use masks, or they would mask the removal of corneas from bodies. We glued the eyelids shut, and we wouldn't take corneas from families we knew would open the eyelids. And that smells our shit, Bob, as the sewage is hitting Gaza streets as Egypt tunnel closures off electricity. Basically, they ran out of electricity, so their sewage is starting to overflow into the streets and that. Children waded through sewage, submerging the streets of central Gaza on Thursday, a day after one of the blockaded Palestinian enclave's largest wastewater treatment plants stopped for a lack of fuel. But it says here as it gets worse, and it goes, if the situation gets untreated or goes untreated, it could soon spill into the homes of tens of thousands of more residents in downtown Gaza. Lastly, Egypt's months-long crackdown on cross-border smuggling tunnels that used to bring fuel in cheaply has already forced Gaza's only power plant to stop, meaning 2 weeks of daily 12-hour blackouts for the territory's 1.8 million residents. More Egypt news. They are warming to Russia as U.S. ties cool. Visit by Russian ministries seen as an attempt by both countries to assert themselves amid. So basically, they're getting closer. They're trying to sell them weapons. So it's all business too. But Russia offers Egypt helicopters and air defense systems. They're offering Egypt combat helicopters and air defense systems, as well as repairs and overhauls of military hardware previously supplied to the troubled Middle Eastern nation. It says that Egypt has not made large-scale purchases of Russian weapons for 4 decades. They're saying Russia will return to its Navy base in Vietnam. The Russian Navy will place a maintenance base in the Vietnamese port of Cam Ranh in accordance with the agreements during Putin's visit to the Asian country. So, moving on here, Russian bombers practiced bombing of Sweden again. They didn't know they did to begin with the first time, but for nearly 2 hours, they were attacking exercises against Sweden, Poland, and the Baltic states of 5 Russian planes, including 2 bombers that were detected via radar as they flew out of the Gulf of Finland. The purpose was to practice these bombers to carry out various types of attacks, and it's not possible that they also wanted to highlight the Russian presence in the southern Baltic. Recently, they were having a row with the Ukraine over Gazprom and delivering gas and stuff like that, and Ukraine was saying that they had enough. And anyways, there's always an issue with them and Gazprom telling them that you're going to freeze in the winter, and we'll cut it off if they don't have enough, or that they don't want to deal with them or pay the prices. So I guess they sealed that deal. But it sucks because it's not really in the hands of the people. The resources are in the hands of a few people that divvy it up to a few other people, and that's who elects these people, like Putin and Medvedev or Obama and Bush. It's usually energy companies and finance companies, banks, and that. Someone told me about this. Sent me a message about in Poland we're celebrating their Independence Day, and it got pretty hairy, I guess. Actually, they started to burn down the rainbow, a big gay pride rainbow display in Poland. So there it is. There's a little picture right there. Polish nationalists attack Russian embassy during Independence Day march. They called them right wing. They had shaven head demonstrators waving red and white flags. They shouted slogans directed against Russia. They say Poland's eastern neighbor, which the demonstrators blamed for World War II atrocities and occupation during the Soviet era. They were shouting God, honor, and fatherland. They then moved into this square, considered Warsaw's gay and bohemian district, setting fire to a symbolic rainbow-colored flower display. Guess it was a symbol of diversity. So I guess if you're proud to be Polish and you're a nationalist, you're considered to be an extremist. So, and that's not tolerated. You can be proud of a minority of people who want their sexual rights, but don't be too proud about being independent and being who you are as a country. They said that aggression, which spelled through the streets of Warsaw, is not an isolated event. It marks a steady rise of the far right in Polish politics and society, which so far has not been addressed by the authorities and faces only sporadic resistance from parts of the general public. Someone sent me this video. I watched 2 parts, and I'll finish it the rest tonight, but it's about the crash. Remember that crash of, it was actually the Polish president and a bunch of other higher-ups in Poland. I mean, it was pretty obvious who it was done by, and they're claiming that it was done by Russia. But how the crash was basically caused by that, and how nobody really said anything. There was no international investigation into it. And they actually showed a video of shots being fired around the plane, and people were being just executed like something out of a movie or a show. While I'm kind of on the subject of the far right, in that you have this UN raps racist slurs against French minister. So the UN human rights body condemned a series of racist attacks against France's black justice minister, calling the abuse a strong manifestation of the rising racism in many parts of Europe. So it says the utterly unacceptable abuse of a prominent politician on the basis of her color is a stark manifestation of the rising racism, xenophobia, and intolerance aimed at members of the ethnic and religious minorities as well as migrants in many countries. Saudi Arabia desperately seeking to avoid a revolt. We talked about that possibly being destabilized. And not really severed, but cooling relations between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, as the U.S. is pumping out record oil, almost the most in the world. So they embarked on a violent crackdown on foreign workers in the kingdom in a desperate attempt to avert social revolt due to its ailing economy. They said the problem for the kingdom is that they've relied on for decades, cheap foreign labor. Sounds familiar. I think that's pretty much the standard for the economy for labor, except in China where they can do it internally until they start demanding higher wages, and they'll just be replaced with robots and they'll go fully automated, unless Americans are willing to do what? Work for less than what the Chinese were, or work harder or be more efficient than robots. I just don't see that happen. So you're going to have an excess of people in the labor force, a lot of excess. And so hopefully the eugenics and the culling, whatever, will basically take place or be done by 2050 for them. I mean, I'm not hoping that it happens. I'm just seeing that's what's going to happen. Ethiopian riot police disperse anti-Saudi protesters. The riot police used force to disperse hundreds of people protesting against targeted attacks on Ethiopian workers in Saudi Arabia. It comes after Ethiopians gathered outside the Saudi embassy in Addis Ababa, to demonstrate against Riyadh's crackdown on illegal immigrants. In Qatar, they approved compulsory military service for men between the ages of 18 to 35. So it's the first of its kind in Qatar, and it will be for 3 months. Workers abandoned oil and gas complex in western Libya. Remember in eastern Libya, I think they were taking control of oil fields and production. Actually, were trying to create their own army. Well, now it's in the west. Armed protesters, were demanding more political rights, i.e. they want to have a say in how their resources are going to be distributed. Clashes, and this is what we have, clashes between residents and militias leave 27 dead in Libya's capital from today. 27 people dead and 235 wounded. So it sounds like another place, right? Like Iraq, where today Iraqi pilgrims, 67 killed, 152 wounded. And a soldier who committed suicide said he was forced to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity in Iraq. France is saying they neutralized al-Qaeda in Mali, but it says here that French troops should hunt al-Qaeda beyond Mali borders. Well, that's not a surprise, right? Some police were wounded in Tunisia as they were carrying out raids against terrorist groups. A poor Tunisian man sets himself ablaze outside a government building in Tunisia. In the Sudan, they're saying that the polio vaccination campaign has been blocked by the government and the rebels. Well, the Gates Foundation is featuring abortion presentations in Ethiopia. This is GGN. Thank you.